Hello, everybody. It's Todd Sivan from Sivan Media Relations, and I'm excited today because I am here with two of my original, I guess I'm going to call them clients, but more so they're friends. Two of my original publicees. I'm the publisher, and they're the poet and the poet's assistant. And that's Tom Damalukas and Laura Chagnon. How are you guys?
We're great.
Doing great, Ted.
Did I finally pronounce your name right after all these years, Tom?
No, you consistently do it wrong, but that's no problem. Everyone else does it wrong too. So
Right. When I'm not a publisher, I'm a butcher. So I'm glad I could butcher your name like everybody else does. So for those who know Tom and Laura's story, or really it's Laura's story as told by both of them, Laura came to me several years ago asking me to write her first book, publish her first book of poetry. And I call it the first book. It's the first book I published of poetry, but her poetry writing has gone back long before I entered the picture. So I'm going to let Tom and Laura take over from here and share the story of Laura and how she became one of the state's and probably the nation's, the world's most accomplished poets.
Okay, great. Yeah, Laura's story is very unique, and that's the reason we want to share with others. Laura's very spiritual. Laura, who's your best friend?
My best friend is
God's her best friend, and we'll explain that as to why God saved her life. We'll go into detail on that later. Laura's someone who always had she's always had to pick herself up in life. She was knocked down at an early age because of her shyness. How did that hurt you growing up, Laura?
that just made me feel really bad about myself, and I didn't have friends.
And you were bullied.
Yes, and I was bullied.
So being bullied made her childhood, her adolescence difficult. She dropped out of high school at the age of 16 because of the peer pressure, but she was writing poetry back then. And that was something that was her sanctuary. She went on, you got your GED,
Yes.
and then she entered the military to try and get the GI Bill to pay for college. And that started to work out well, but she got sick during basic training, and they gave her a medical discharge, an honorable discharge, medical discharge, and once again she had to start over.
And I think if I'm not mistaken, Tom, it was a sleep issue. Was that correct?
Yes, and that all started as a youth because of the bullying. Laura got anxiety and insomnia. So the insomnia has carried with her throughout her entire life, and that was a culprit in the military. So after being discharged from the military, she came back home to West Springfield and decided maybe she could afford a 2-year college. And that was, what college was that, Laura?
That was
Springfield?
Springfield Technical Community College.
And what was your major going to be?
Medical assistant.
So everything was going pretty well the first year, good grades and everything. Second year, she was still doing great. And on her 26th birthday, November 4th, 1989, Laura decided she would do something special, and that was to take a day trip to Boston. And things didn't go quite as planned. What were some of the things you did during the day when you got off the bus there?
Well, I wanted to go in the shops and see how. I always heard that Boston had some really nice stores. I want to check that out.
So she was your typical tourist in Boston, seeing as much as she could, knowing she was just going to be there one day. And later in the day, late afternoon, she was going back to the bus stop, to the bus station, and she heard a couple footsteps behind her. Now, her time in the military, there was a lot of marching, and she was in tune with the cadence of footsteps. And you noticed something different. What happened as you started to walk a little faster as you got nervous, Lori?
The footsteps would walk faster too.
And then Laura decided she'd slow down, maybe let these people pass her, but that didn't work out either.
No, they didn't pass me. In fact, they slowed down to my footsteps.
So this left a very uneasy feeling in Laura's, the pit of her stomach. Just when you know something's not right, you may be in danger, and that shadow was cast over her, and she's a few blocks from the bus station. She heard a third set of footsteps, but those were very soft, and if she turned around, she wouldn't have seen who they belonged to. Now Laura's about a block and a half away. She's walking as fast as she can. She knows she'll be at that bus station soon, and a block away, she could hear the buses pulling in and out. She could see some of the buses. Now she was starting to feel a little better, except a gift that she got on her birthday, a white leather purse. She had it over her shoulder, and she felt a little tug on it, and then a very sharp tug. It spun her around. She looked into the eyes of two strangers who just said, "Keep your mouth shut or we're going to hurt you." They had their car parked nearby. They had timed it. They would catch up to Laura right where their car was. One grabbed her arm, the other one opened the door, and she was thrown into the vehicle before she could say anything, and they took off. So on Laura's 26th birthday, she was kidnapped.
And this was in broad daylight, correct?
Well, late afternoon,
Yeah.
and being a fall day, it was starting to get dark, and apparently nobody saw it happen. It happened so fast, and they took off with Laura.
Okay.
And we found from doing speaking presentations in the prisons through the staff that over 90% of women who get abducted are never heard from again. So Laura's chance of surviving were slim. They took off. They went to a secluded area. They looked at your purse, Laura. And what was the first thing they said?
They said, "I hope she has some money because then we can get Highland."
Laura was kidnapped by two heroin addicts. They thought she was a soft target. When they kidnapped her, they wanted money. They took her purse, her ID. She only had about $10 in her purse. The next thing they did, they sexually assaulted her. And then after that, they told her to get out of the vehicle. She thought she was going to be free, but one of the men got out with her. He held her while the other person reached under the seat and came out with a bat or a club and went right up to Laura and started beating her over the head with it. The result was he fractured Laura's skull. She was completely out, and they possibly killed her. Later that evening, a strange incident happened. Laura ended up being found at 3:30 in the morning on Harrison Avenue, Boston. At 2:30 in the morning, there was a traffic accident at a red light where a car took off, and the officers started searching the area, driving around looking for that vehicle. It's interesting because at 3:30, they found Laura lying on Harrison Avenue. Laura, we don't know, but she could have been in that vehicle. And after the accident, they could have taken off and thrown her out of the vehicle. So 3:30 in the morning, Laura truly believes, since it was such a strange occurrence, that the police officer was directed by God to find her.
Amazing.
He found her, very bad head injury. Her blouse was unbuttoned, her jeans were unzipped, and that's how he found Laura. He found Laura, called an ambulance, and they rushed her to New England Medical Center. Laura's ID was stolen during the incident, so when she got to New England Medical Center, she was in a coma, so there was no communication between her and the hospital staff. She was a Jane Doe in the hospital. She remained in a coma for 5 weeks. After 5 weeks, Laura, something happened. You weren't in that hospital room alone, were you?
No, I wasn't. I thought God was with me.
They put her on a breathing tube, a feeding tube, and that's all they could do to keep her alive. But after 5 weeks, you opened your eyes.
Right.
And what did you say?
I recited, I said my mom's name, and I recited my phone number.
So the hospital staff wrote it down. They called her parents, and her mom came to the hospital. The medical staff, the doctors told her mother things aren't very encouraging because your daughter is alive, but now she's a legally blind quadriplegic with a severe traumatic brain injury. Laura scored very low on cognitive tests when she came out of her coma. And the suggestion was Laura should be put in a facility for the rest of her life because it'd be too much of a burden on her parents. But what did your mom say, Laura?
My mom said, hell no. She's gonna get better. She's gonna continue to make progress, and she's gonna come back to our home.
Laura spent the next 3.5 years in each physical and occupational rehab facilities all around New England. And then she finally returned home. First thing Laura did, she wanted to be productive. She put the past behind her. She forgave the people who assaulted her, even though they were never caught. She forgave them, forgot about them, and wanted to move on. But she was scared. She didn't know what the next day would bring. She couldn't work a standard job. She remembered her poetry. And Laura had caregivers and volunteers. And Laura took the words of, we listened to Dick Hoyt speak one time in Brimfield. And after the presentation, he told Laura, if you put your mind to something, you can do whatever you want to do. And never forgot that. And something clicked. She remembered her poetry. And she said, well, I can dictate my words to my caregivers. They could write them in my thought book. And when a poem was complete, they could put it on the computer and save it in the documents. And that started in 1992. And Laura was doing this every day.
And 1992.
Yeah. So Laura started creating poems one after another. Tommy Shea, a journalist from the Springfield newspaper, wrote several articles about Laura and said she had a work ethic to be envied. So this was huge in Laura's life because she didn't think of herself as a quadriplegic anymore. She thought of herself as a poet. But her dream was to become a published poet. I met Laura in 2000. She continued writing her poetry, and she said, Tom, I wish I could share my words with the world because I've entered my poems in contests, submitted them to newspapers. I've gotten good feedback, but I really think my poems are of good enough quality to be published. So we kept on, Laura kept on writing. In 2013, I purchased a book called One Letter at a Time by Dick Hoyt's son, Rick Hoyt, written with Todd Sivan. After I purchased the book, I got an email from Todd, and he said, I'm glad you purchased the book. I did it while I was a night shift at Laura's. And he said, what were you doing up so late? I explained Laura's story briefly to him. And I said, is there any way you could publish Laura? And we had lunch together. We arranged to have a lunch at a Ruby Tuesdays in the Holyoke Mall. It was a Friday afternoon, the three of us. And we didn't even talk about poetry, but Todd told us to bring about 25 of Laura's poems. He had a flight going to El Paso, Texas that weekend. He'd read the poems on the flight out and back. And on Monday, after talking with his workers, he would let us know if her poems were worthy enough to be published. So, Laura, you were like a 6-year-old kid. Monday was going to be your Christmas.
That's right. I was so excited that I was about getting a book published. I just couldn't stand still.
So Monday came. Laura's waiting for that call from Todd. No call from Todd that day. In fact, I think we went through the whole week. Todd never called. And the following week, I said, Laura, you know, he could be very busy. We'll wait and see what happens. Don't give up. We waited. It was Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of the following week. Still no call from Todd. And Laura, if you were to give advice to anyone out there, you've been knocked down so many times in your life, you could have given up. What words would you say to others out there who are struggling?
I would say to other people who are struggling, don't give up. Go forth. Follow your dreams. I had a dream to become a published poet, but I had adversities. I couldn't hold the pen to write. Couldn't even see the written page, but I didn't give up.
Laura had faith. She knew God saved her for a reason, and she just wasn't going to give up. And later that week, it was, I believe it was a Thursday night. It was after dinner. We were in your room, and you were doing what you always did, creating poetry. And my cell phone rang. I looked at the caller ID, and sure enough, it was that guy, Sivan. And I said, Laura, Todd's calling. He's calling about a week and a half late. I don't know if this will be good news. And Laura said, put the phone up to my ear. I want to see what he has to hear, what he has to say. And Laura, what did Todd say to you that night?
Todd said, Laura, I read all your poems. They're beautiful, and we want to publish it.
So 25 years after Laura was assaulted and left for dead in Boston, 25 years later, Laura's dream of being a published poet was finally coming true. And Laura didn't stop there. And she's been on a journey with Todd for the last 7 years because she has published 4 more books since that first book. At one point, Random House Publishing wanted to take her under their wings, and that could have been huge for Laura. But to show you the type of person Laura is, we talked about it, and Laura said, no, Todd is more than a publisher. He's
our friend.
He opened the door for Laura. He's our friend. And Laura showed her loyalty, and she said, my publishing journey is going to be only with Todd Sivan. And now Laura's ready. She's getting ready for her 6th book, which will be called All for His Glory. And Laura's not stopping there. She plans on publishing possibly 3 books this year. Laura feels she's got a bonus on her life.
Yeah.
She should have died in 1989. She didn't, and she takes advantage of every day. Every morning at breakfast, she thanks God for another day. And that's the reason she's going to do as much as she can to inspire others. We've been speaking in prisons for the last 7 years, but with the COVID, naturally, we can't go in and do that. But she was given an award back in 2019 for her volunteer service in the prisons. She's spoken over 200 times to the inmates. They love her. And what they see in Laura, they see hope. They see someone who is broken. They're broken in their way. They see how Laura was broken and how she didn't give up. And she reached her goals. And most of all, that she's found peace through your relationship with God. And she tells them if they open up their hearts, they can do the same.
That's right.
So
it's
amazing. So amazing. If I can cut in just for a second, because right now people are listening and they're saying, Laura's and Tom are great. Todd's kind of a procrastinator. He should have called her earlier. And so I'm sitting here just filled with guilt. And I want to explain that I was building up suspense, Laura. If right away, there would have been no suspense and no story. I was
right.
up suspense. So I just wanted to clear the air there.
Yeah, and it makes a very good part of the storytelling. We appreciate that.
Yeah, my pleasure. So Laura, would you share a poem or two with us while we have a live and listening audience?
Absolutely. Yes. This poem is entitled God Talking to Crows. When I made you, I loved you, color of night. No one sees your beauty like I do. You are the universe, larger than life. I gave you all you needed, the sky. Your voice talks to me like thunder. When I look at the wings of midnight, oh, how I love my creation.
Amazing. Now, am I right, both of you, that with Laura's traumatic brain injury, she has difficulty with memory at times, and yet she can remember many of her poems? Is that accurate?
Yes.
She has some of her poems memorized, but as far as her short-term memory, you're correct. She has a very difficult time with memory, and that's why if she's creating a new poem, she needs someone with her, or she may forget the lines that will be going into that poem. So we always say Laura's written over 6,000 poems and has probably forgotten about 500 others because no one was with her right at the time. But
do I have time to recite one more?
I didn't hear you. I'm sorry.
Do I have to recite one more?
Oh,
one more poem?
Yeah, I'd love that.
Okay, this one's entitled Invincible. And it goes like this. I remember when I read into the night, my own hand held a fork to eat and a pen to write. I thought I was invincible. I remember when I was very shy. I needed to escape so I could reach the sky. I thought I was invincible.
My wheelchair.
My wheelchair's in the corner. My PCA's a little late. I listen to the birds outside. I lay in bed and wait. I know I'm not invincible. This message is for everyone. Please be careful what you do. Life is so very, very precious. A gift God gave to you. Don't think that you are invincible.
Incredible. Now, if she suffers in memory sometimes, could we retell the story that maybe I called her like a day after instead of a week and a half after.
Yes.
Hoping that she doesn't remember how long it was. But seriously, I do have a question, Laura.
Yes.
To recap, you went out on your birthday, your 25th birthday, a magnificent, memorable birthday. You treated
26.
I'm 26, I'm sorry. You treated yourself to Boston. You were attacked and left for dead, and yet you forgive. I don't understand, and I don't know how other people would expect you to forgive. Why? How do you forgive?
Well, I figured I didn't really forgive. I more forgot than forgive, but I felt like if I did forgive, and it would be forgiving, and my heart would be settled. And that's why I did that.
It was a healing process. Forgiveness was a healing process for Laura. Otherwise, she would be going over this in her mind day after day. It would just tear her apart.
Right. I'd rather forgive rather than live in anguish and anger and negative emotions.
We've seen other people who've had other incidents who couldn't forgive, and it just ripped them apart years and years later. This way, Laura doesn't think about it. She forgave and she forgot and moved on because she wanted to be a productive member of society. And the only way she could move forward was to put
the
this
past behind.
Yeah.
And it's
So is that part of the message for listeners, and I guess most importantly, or more importantly, for people that you speak to in the prisons, what's the overall message? Forgiveness?
It's forgiveness, and also that
follow your dream.
follow their dreams.
Follow your dream.
They're grateful to hear a story where someone was broken and then found peace in their life, because they're broken and they haven't found the peace. And then they see Laura coming in. They don't know what her story is, but they see her in a wheelchair and they see peace over her face. And then when they hear her story and hear the traumatic incident and then see that she has so much peace, they're amazed. And then they realize they're grateful, because they come up and they say, Laura, you gave us hope. They didn't have any hope before. So I would say the message is she gives them hope.
And I want to add one more thing.
Sure.
God is guiding me through all of this. And he's in my life. I feel him every single day. And I trust him, and I just follow God.
That's beautiful. I want to thank you guys. I know you've enhanced my life over the past several years, and anybody who hasn't read your poetry, I'm gonna say this as a closed-minded reader, and I didn't know that I could learn to love poetry as much as I do until I read one of Laura's poems, and it became contagious. Once you read one, you have to read the next, and you have to read the next book. And so I have no shortage of time, and you have no shortage of poems. And so I look forward to many, many more years and many, many more publications together.
Yes, I do too, Todd. Thank you.
We look forward to it.
Okay, love you both.
Okay.
Love you too.
Love you, Todd. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.